All right, today a defiant Donald Trump claimed that he could bypass the Supreme Court's decision that ruled that his use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs was illegal.
The good news is that there are methods, practices, statutes, and authorities, as recognized by the entire court in this terrible decision, and also as recognized by Congress, which they refer to, that are even stronger than the IEEPA tariffs available to me as President of the United States.
Apparently, Donald Trump missed when Chief Justice John Roberts said, quote, "The president's assertion here of broad statutory power over the national economy is extravagant by any measure." Here's Donald Trump's strange perversion of what the Supreme Court's ruling means for how he approaches dealing with foreign countries.
I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country. I'm even allowed to impose a foreign country-destroying embargo. I can embargo. I can do anything I want, but I can't charge $1. I can do anything I want to do to them, but I can't charge any money. So I'm allowed to destroy the country, but I can't charge them a little fee.
Actually, he's not allowed to destroy another country, but that's another topic. Sulking from his loss, the petulant president proceeded to impose new global tariffs under different statutes. As the Washington Post details, quote, "Those will include a 10% global tariff under Section 122, which allows the president to swiftly impose tariffs, but only for 150 days, as well as several new tariffs under Section 301, which applies to unfair trade practices." But the Supreme Court's decision made clear that Donald Trump could not impose tariffs without Congress. And here's how he responded when asked about working with Congress.
Why wouldn't you just work with Congress to come up with a plan?
I don't have to
push tariffs.
I have
through.
the right to do tariffs.
I don't know. Apparently, he just wasn't going to read that decision. Joining us now is Professor Lawrence Tribe, who's taught constitutional law at Harvard Law School for 5 decades. Larry, I need you on days like this because the court was pretty clear. It was not written in hard-to-understand language, even for non-lawyers like me. Donald Trump, I don't know if he's not getting the point or he just doesn't want to get the point.
Well, in fact, to clarify just a bit more, this was not, despite what many people seem to think, it was not a constitutional controversy, believe it or not.
Yes, correct.
All 9 justices agreed that the Constitution gives only Congress the power to tax and impose tariffs. The only question is whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was an act by which Congress delegated that power to the president. The court read the act. It was a simple case, actually very simple, and it said, no, the act does not give the president any tariff-imposing power. End of case. That's why most people, me included, had no trouble predicting this would be a decision against the president. It was also not so strange that the case reached the court because Neil and his client, Mr. Woldenberg, sued in a federal district court. That case ended up being dismissed by the U.S. Supreme Court, saying the district court didn't have jurisdiction. It was the Court of International Trade that had jurisdiction. That court read the law simply and said the president doesn't have the power under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. At that point, the U.S. Supreme Court had no choice but to take the case, because whenever the act of Congress is held not to cover something, and the president loses something that's central to him, the court always takes the case. Once it took the case, it was slam dunk. Now, Neil argued the case brilliantly. It was a wonderful argument, but there was no doubt how it would come out. And what is left over, now that the Supreme Court has said 6-3, you don't have the power under this statute, is that he's invoking power under Section 122 of 1974 Trade Act. It is not true that the president automatically has that power. That was the suggestion by Justice Kavanaugh in dissent. The Chief Justice, in footnote 4 of his opinion, said, not so fast. Whether that applies depends on whether certain findings are made, and it only lasts for a certain amount of time, and it can't go above 15%. There are matters still to be litigated. And when the president says, I don't have to deal with Congress, he obviously hasn't read the law, which says you damn well better deal with Congress because your power here will expire after 150 days.
Right.
That means that the shoe is on the other foot. Instead of having to get Congress to act to stop him, he now has to get Congress to act in order to extend these tariffs. So the president lost big on a statutory issue. There were all kinds of very valuable constitutional sort of quiverings in the opinion. The majority opinion by the Chief Justice talked about how emergency powers tend to spawn emergencies. They tend to give presidents excuses for usurping Congress. There were a lot of indications that when push comes to shove, the court will stand up for the law. And happily, the president didn't say, well, I'm not going to obey the court. What he did was he said he's going to use another law. That's fine. And then he went out of his way to call the justices, including principally his own appointees, fools, lapdogs, doing the bidding of the far left and of the rhinos. He asserted with no evidence that the justices who voted against him were influenced by foreign nations, that they were basically traitors. I mean, this is unprecedented for a president who himself cannot plausibly deny that he is influenced by his friends and buddies, and that he's not exactly acting always in the national interest. To accuse the Supreme Court of abdicating its duty as an independent judge of the law, and to say that their families should be ashamed, which is a terrible signal in a country where their families, including the family of Amy Coney Barrett, have been threatened, have been put in danger. This president doesn't mind putting his own appointees in danger for their lives in order to make his ridiculous point that they were stupid and didn't understand the law.
I want to explore something that you just mentioned. It was a 6-3 vote. Possibly could have been a 7-2 vote if Justice Kavanaugh would come around on this. But here's something that he wrote in his dissenting opinion. He said, in essence, the court today concludes that the president checked the wrong statutory box by relying on IEEPA rather than another statute to impose these tariffs. In the meantime, however, the interim effects of the court's decision could be substantial. The United States may be required to refund billions of dollars to importers who paid the IEEPA tariffs, even though some importers may have already passed on costs to consumers or others. As was acknowledged at oral arguments, the refund process is likely to be a mess. Now, he's not wrong about that. That's true. But that's not the work of the court to determine how the government should administer the refund process. The court could have told the government, refund the money. It seemed like strange arguments.
Well, it's very strange, especially for a justice who says we look at the law and apply it. Of course, it's reasonable for justices to be pragmatic when they're interpreting an ambiguous statute to think about the consequences. But here there was no ambiguity. The president didn't have the power. And the fact that it's going to be a mess to unscramble these eggs is the president's fault, not that of the court. And in no way did Justice Kavanaugh explain the relevance of these observations. The fact is that the people who were most hurt were the consumers, and they are very unlikely to get a refund. Then the small businesses, like the one whose CEO you talked to today, maybe they'll get a partial refund. But if they end up being out some money, it's because the president, it wasn't just that he checked the wrong box. used a statute that didn't apply. The Kavanaugh suggestion that if he had checked a different box, the same thing could have happened, that's just not true. All of these retaliatory taxes, these 100%, 30%, the taxes under the law he's now invoking, the 1974 Act, there's a 15% ceiling. He couldn't have done much of what he has done in this case, basically randomly using his delegated authority outside the boundaries that Congress itself set, because it didn't give him the power to impose tariffs, though he could do all kinds of other things like licensing fees